Hi, welcome to Rajal Live. In today's video, I am going to discuss about SQL, which is we call it as structured query language. As we all know, whenever we are working on the application development in reference to the applications, whatever we develop, importance of database followed by extracting the queries from the database for the better results and all, everything is required. It is not only for the technical team or development team, all that. Even this is also required even for people who are working as a business analyst for some projects which are essentially required to have a knowledge over SQL. In this regard, I am just making a video. What exactly am I going to cover in reference to the SQL, which is useful for the people who wants to learn SQL and all everything for their professional experiences and professional requirements. Let's get into the point. So this is what generally which I'm going to cover, which is the first one, which is called SQL concepts and all that. The first thing which I'm going to cover. In the SQL concepts, I'm going to cover what are the definitions of SQL. At the same time, the kind of history, right? These are all the basic things which I'm going to be covering here. Followed by this, I'm going to cover about what are the different commands and all everything in SQL, like what are the different types of commands we have, right? At the same time, understanding about the overall structure about SQL, right? All these things are explained under the first one, which is called SQL concepts, all that. After that, I'm going to explain about building our own database, because whenever we want to write SQL queries and all, it is always important for us to have a knowledge over the database and how this database has to be connected. Usually we use SQL database, SQL database, normally we use SQL Server, all that. So building the database is important. So, but before we are getting into building the database, one must be knowing about what exactly data are, right? So what are the different types of data do we have? At the same time, how we are going to manage database objects. At the same time, right. So what is meant by database? At the same time, what are defining data structures? At the same time, what is database types? Followed by this, we must be knowing about what are different database objects we have, followed by the kind of schemas what we have, right? So what are the different schemas which are involved in it? At the same time, knowing about the integrity constraints, primary storageation of data, all these things will be covered in this. Apart from that, we must be knowing about the normalization process, because normalizing a database or denormalizing a database, all these are needed. Apart from that, we must be knowing about how to manipulate the data. So for that, we need to know the knowledge over the manipulation of data, like overall view about the manipulation of data is also essentially needed. So overview of data manipulation, right? So populating the tables with data. At the same time, how to update existing data to that, right? How to delete data from the tables. This sort of knowledge is also required over here. Next, once it is done, we need to know about the database transactions. So for that, we should have a clear understanding over what exactly the transaction is all about. And at the same time, how to control the transactions, right? So transaction control database performances. So this sort of knowledge is also required for any person who is going to learn SQL, all that. Next, third point, I'm going to explain about getting effective results from the queries. So for that, we need to know about what exactly database query and what exactly query is all about. Wherein it starts with select statement, right? So what are the different simple queries do we have? At the same time, we must be knowing even about operators which are used to categorize the data, right? So at the same time, operators in SQL, comparison of operators, logical operators, we need to know about conjunctive operators, negative, arithmetic. So knowing about operators is also one of the things which I'm going to cover in this. Along with this, I'm going to explain the summarization of the data results from a query, where we need to know about aggregate functions. At the same time, sorting and grouping the data. For that, we must be knowing about how to group the data. At the same time, how to clause that, right? So role of functions, expressions, order by, all these will be covered under this third one. Along with this, we must be knowing about how to restructure the data, which is to be appeared under. So for that, we must be knowing about the common characteristics which are involved in it. All these things will also be a part of it. Followed by this, we must be knowing about how to data sort the data. So data sorting, right? What are the different data functions we have, data conversions. That sort of knowledge is also required, and that is even covered here. Next one, building sophisticated database queries. So for that, you need to have knowledge over the joining tables in queries and all that. So that's what I'm going to cover here, right? We need to understand different joins and join considerations, and how the subqueries and all everything we use to define unknown data. We need to know about, again, in subqueries we have like embedded and correlated and subqueries, all that. So that sort of knowledge will also be covered. Followed by this, I'm going to cover about how to combine multiple queries into one. So order by, group by, right? All these things will also be a part of this building sophisticated database queries, all that. Next, fifth part, which I'm going to cover about SQL performance tuning, where we must be knowing about indexes, right? So creation of index and how to alter it, how to drop the indexes, right? So all these things will be explained in this performance tuning. Along with this, we need to know about database performances. So for that, we must be knowing about SQL statement tunings. At the same time, database tuning versus SQL tunings. We must be knowing about table scans, SQL statement formatting. At the same time, performance tools, cost-based optimizations. All these things are also part of SQL, which I am going to cover in this. Next, after that, I am going to cover using SQL, how to manage users and securities, wherein we must be knowing about user management in the database, management process, what are the tools which are utilized for the database users to use it, how to manage database security, right? So what exactly database security is all about, and how to manage database security. So this part even covering here. And next, one more important point, which we have to know about data structures, like how to summarize the data. First of all, we need to know about views or tables. At the same time, we must be knowing about system catalogs. All these things will be a part of data structures, which I'm going to cover in this. Last but not least, applying SQL as far as fundamentals itself is concerned, we must be knowing about the topics of SQL. We must be knowing about cursors, stores procedures, triggers. At the same time, we must be knowing about dynamic SQL and how are we using SQL to generate SQL versus embedded SQLs. At the same time, working with extensible markup languages, which is called XML, and how to extend SQL to the enterprise level by accessing the remote databases, all that. Followed by this, how this extension to the standard SQLs and all everything, where we need to understand the interactive SQL statements. All this will be covered under this SQL part. So this is what generally I'm going to cover as part of SQL itself is concerned, which is highly useful for the people who are working in the technology. Not only for developers and other people, even it is also required even for people who are working as a business analyst is also mostly needed. If you have any queries, if you have any questions in regard to that, followed by your training and teaching needs, please reach out to the contact details, which will be posted in below to this video. Thank you.